What if one man lived almost 1,000 years? A man who witnessed generations rise and fall, who was the son of a man who never died, and the grandfather of the man who would survive the greatest disaster in biblical history. His name was Methuselah, and according to the book of Genesis, he lived 969 years, making him the longest living person recorded in the Bible. But Methuselah's life is more than just a number. His lifespan spans nearly the entire pre-flood world. He saw the moral corruption of humanity grow. He saw the rise of civilization. And his very name may carry a hidden warning that his death would mark the coming of judgment. Tonight we uncover the life, family, and mystery of Methuselah, a man whose story is largely forgotten, yet whose life connects Adam, Noah, and the flood itself. To understand Methuselah, we need to journey back over thousands of years, to the earliest generations of humanity. After Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, humanity began to multiply across the earth. Each generation brought new life, new families, and slowly the rise of the first human societies. Adam lived 930 years, and his son Seth, through whom the righteous line continued, lived 912 years. Long lifespans were the norm in this early period, stretching human experience far beyond anything we know today. Methuselah was born into this extraordinary world, a world of giant spans of life, where a single person could witness the birth and death of multiple generations. His father was Enoch, a man unlike any other in Genesis. Enoch walked with God, a phrase that tells us he lived in intimate fellowship with the Creator. For hundreds of years, Enoch served as a spiritual guide, and Methuselah was raised under his influence. But what made this family remarkable wasn't just faith, it was fate. Enoch did not die, as the Bible makes clear. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Genesis 5 verse 24. Enoch's disappearance, rather than death, set the stage for Methuselah's extraordinary life. Born to a father removed from death itself, Methuselah entered a world that was expanding and evolving, but one that was already beginning to fall into corruption. In this era, humans were spreading across the earth, building early settlements, and developing the first aspects of civilization. But Genesis 6 hints at something troubling. Corruption and violence were growing in the hearts of men. Methuselah's birth was not just the continuation of a family line, it was the beginning of a life that would span the rise of humanity and the warning of judgment, a life that would make him a bridge between the first humans and the man who would survive the flood, Noah. Methuselah was born into a world both wondrous and dangerous, a world where humanity was thriving but also beginning to fall into corruption. To fully grasp his story, we need to understand the man who raised him, Enoch, Methuselah's father. Enoch was no ordinary patriarch. The Bible tells us simply, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Genesis 5 verse 24. But behind this short verse lies an extraordinary life. Walking with God in biblical terms meant living in close obedience, deep faith, and spiritual intimacy. Enoch's life stood in sharp contrast to the growing wickedness of humanity around him. While many humans were turning toward violence, greed, and corruption, Enoch lived as an example of righteousness. Methuselah grew up under this shadow. From his earliest years, he would have witnessed not just his father's teachings, but also the spiritual aura surrounding a man taken directly by God. Imagine learning about God's ways from someone whose life was so intertwined with the divine that he never experienced death. For Methuselah, this upbringing may have instilled in him a sense of purpose and destiny. He was not just another man in a long genealogy, he was the son of a figure who would later become a symbol of divine favor and the power of righteousness in a corrupt world. The world around Methuselah, however, was far from perfect. Genesis 6 describes a generation that was becoming increasingly corrupt. Humanity's hearts were turning toward evil, and violence was multiplying across the earth. Methuselah's early years were spent in a world of contrast, the moral decay of the general population, juxtaposed with the righteousness of his father's household. This environment shaped Methuselah in ways that few of us can imagine. He witnessed firsthand both the fragility and resilience of humanity. He saw the rise of civilization and the creeping shadow of sin. He grew up in a world where death existed for most men, but his father defied it. And he learned early that life could be both long and fleeting, depending on one's relationship with God. As Methuselah matured, he began to take his place in the family line that would eventually lead to Noah. But unlike Noah, Methuselah's life would be measured not by his deeds alone, but by the sheer length of his existence, a lifespan that would make him the longest living man in the Bible. The spiritual and moral context of Methuselah's upbringing, his father's righteous example, the expanding but morally faltering human population, and the looming judgment hinted at in Genesis, set the stage for a life that would become both extraordinary and prophetic. Methuselah's life was not just a continuation of the generations before him, it was a living bridge between the earliest humans and the era of the flood. And as he grew, he would begin to see how his life fit into the larger story of humanity, judgment, and divine patience. As Methuselah grew into adulthood, his life became more than a continuation of his father's legacy. He inherited not only the family line but also a world on the brink of great upheaval. The earth was filling with people, and yet, alongside this growth, humanity's hearts were increasingly turning toward violence and corruption. It is in this context that the significance of Methuselah's name becomes particularly fascinating. Scholars studying ancient Hebrew suggest that the name Methuselah may carry a prophetic meaning. When he dies, it shall come, or alternatively, his death shall bring it. This is remarkable because, according to biblical chronology, Methuselah's death coincided with the year the flood began. Could it be that his life itself functioned as a warning, a countdown ticking through nearly a millennium? Some theologians and historians think so. Methuselah's extraordinarily long life, 969 years, was more than a numerical record. It became a visible symbol of patience, warning, and divine timing. For centuries, he lived through the rise of human civilization and the spread of moral decay, observing the gradual accumulation of humanity's sins. And all the while, the prophecy embedded in his name was quietly counting down to the moment when judgment would arrive. Imagine what it must have been like to live for nearly 1,000 years, watching generation after generation of humanity grow, flourish, and ultimately fail to live up to God's intentions. Methuselah would have seen the earliest cities, the spread of families across the earth, and the beginnings of human culture, while also witnessing the steady rise of violence and corruption. Yet, despite all of this, the flood did not come immediately. Instead, Methuselah's long life may have represented God's patience and mercy, a window of opportunity for humanity to turn back toward righteousness. His very existence served as a living reminder that time was being given, that judgment was delayed, and that humanity still had a chance to change. This chapter of Methuselah's life also raises intriguing questions. Was he aware of his name's prophecy? Did he understand that his own death might signal the coming of divine judgment? The Bible is silent on this, leaving much to interpretation, but the alignment of his lifespan and the timing of the flood is one of the most compelling mysteries of the biblical record. Methuselah's adulthood, then, was more than mere survival or the continuation of a family line. It was a symbolic period in human history, stretching across centuries and bridging the moral decline of the pre-flood world with the impending judgment that would reshape the earth. He was a witness to history, a living bridge between humanity's earliest beginnings and the man who would survive the flood, Noah. And as the years passed, Methuselah's life became a testament not only to extraordinary longevity but also to the quiet, inexorable approach of destiny itself. As Methuselah entered adulthood, his life became entwined with the continuation of his family line. He fathered a son named Lamech, who would carry forward the righteous lineage of Adam through Seth. Lamech, in turn, became the father of Noah, the man chosen by God to survive the impending flood. Through this lineage, Methuselah was not just a witness to history, he was a central figure in the unfolding story of humanity. Imagine Methuselah watching the young Noah grow. Imagine observing a child who would one day build a massive ark and preserve life during a cataclysm that would wipe out nearly every living being on Earth. Methuselah's presence in Noah's life represents a direct connection between the earliest humans and the survivors of the flood. The family tree highlights something remarkable. Methuselah's life spanned almost the entire pre-flood era, from the generations of Adam to the birth of Noah. He was, in many ways, a living bridge, a link between humanity's first experiences and its survival through divine intervention. But Methuselah's role was not just about genealogy. His family life reflects the moral and spiritual climate of his time. Genesis suggests that even in these long-lived generations, corruption was growing, and the inclination toward evil was becoming more pronounced. Yet Methuselah's household stood as a beacon of continuity, transmitting both faith and moral guidance from one generation to the next. His role as grandfather to Noah emphasizes the importance of generational influence. While the world around them descended into violence, Methuselah and his family represented the continuity of the righteous line, a lineage chosen to survive and rebuild after judgment. Moreover, Methuselah's life demonstrates a profound truth about human longevity in Genesis. It was not just about individual years, but about the impact of life across generations. A person who lived hundreds of years could shape the spiritual and moral development of many others, creating ripples across centuries. Through Methuselah, we see the interconnection of history, morality, and destiny. His life spanned both human achievement and human failure. He was a witness to the rise of civilization, the corruption of the human heart, and the preparation of Noah, the man who would preserve life during the flood. Methuselah's extraordinary lifespan allowed him to witness a world unlike any we know today, a world still young in its history, yet already falling into chaos. Genesis 6 paints a grim picture of this pre-flood era. It tells us that humanity had grown increasingly violent. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6 verse 5. For centuries, Methuselah observed humanity multiplying across the earth. Families expanded, cities arose, and early forms of civilization began to take shape. Yet alongside these advances, human hearts were turning away from righteousness. Violence, greed, and corruption became common. Unlike his contemporaries, Methuselah was born into the lineage of righteousness, under the guidance of his father Enoch. He would have known the stories of creation, the teachings of his father, and the warnings about sin. Yet the world outside his home continued to deteriorate. This period of history raises an incredible tension. Methuselah's life was extraordinarily long, but it was also witness to humanity's moral decline. He saw generation after generation fail to uphold the standards of justice, kindness, and faith. And with every passing century, the urgency of God's impending judgment grew. The Bible suggests that God observed the wickedness of the world with sorrow. Humanity had become so corrupt that divine intervention was necessary. Yet judgment did not come immediately. Instead, Methuselah's long life served as a kind of divine delay, a period of patience, allowing humans more time to change. Imagine the weight of knowing that destruction was coming, yet having centuries to live through the world's decline. Methuselah would have seen families, communities, and entire cities succumb to violence. He would have witnessed greed, deceit, and injustice spread across the earth. And through it all, his family stood as a continuation of the righteous line. Lamech, his son, and eventually Noah, his grandson, would carry this legacy forward. In this sense, Methuselah's life was a silent counterpoint to the corruption around him, a reminder that righteousness could survive, even in a world filled with evil. By the time Methuselah reached the later centuries of his life, the world had become almost entirely consumed by wickedness. Yet even at this point, humanity had not fully lost the chance for repentance. His extraordinary lifespan represents more than just personal longevity. It represents the patience and mercy of God, extending opportunity after opportunity for humanity to change its course. Methuselah's witness to this morally decaying world makes his life profoundly symbolic. He was not merely the longest living man in the Bible. He was a living observer of history, a man whose life embodied the tension between divine patience and the inevitability of judgment. In the centuries that followed, this tension would reach its climax, culminating in the event that would reshape the earth and humanity itself, the flood. Methuselah lived through nearly a millennium, a span of life almost unimaginable to us today. He witnessed the rise and fall of generations, the growth of early civilizations, and the deepening corruption of humanity. And yet, despite all this, the flood had not yet come. The final years of Methuselah's life were a period of tension and prophecy. According to the meaning attributed to his name, when he dies, it shall come. His death was not just the end of a life, it was the signal for one of the most cataclysmic events in biblical history. By this time, Methuselah had grown old enough to see the full moral decay of the pre-flood world. Violence and corruption had become nearly universal. Families, cities, and communities were dominated by wickedness. But even as humanity spiraled downward, Methuselah's family, the line of Seth, remained a beacon of righteousness. His son Lamech and grandson Noah continued this legacy. They were living reminders that even in a corrupt world, the righteous could endure. Methuselah's long life allowed him to personally witness Noah's growth and the preparation for survival in the coming judgment. The Bible tells us that Lamech died 5 years before the flood, leaving Methuselah as the elder patriarch of the family. Then, in a moment that would fulfill the prophecy implied by his name, Methuselah himself died, the same year the flood began. This alignment is striking. For 969 years, Methuselah lived as a bridge between the earliest humans and the man chosen to survive God's judgment. And the moment he passed, the waters came. One can imagine the weight of this realization. Methuselah's entire life had been a countdown, a living symbol of patience and divine timing. His death was more than a personal end. It was the signal that humanity's opportunity to change had passed and judgment had arrived. Methuselah's final years also emphasized the incredible span of pre-flood life. For centuries, he had been a silent observer of humanity's rise and decline, a witness to both achievement and corruption. He had seen the world take shape, had guided and influenced his family, and had lived long enough to see the person who would ultimately preserve life through the ark. And yet, despite all he had witnessed, Methuselah himself never experienced the flood. His life ended just before the waters rose, a poetic conclusion to the longest life in human history, marking the boundary between the old, corrupt world and the new world that would emerge through Noah. Methuselah's death, therefore, was both an end and a signal. It marked the conclusion of the pre-flood era and the beginning of a cataclysm that would reshape the earth and humanity forever. His life stands as a profound symbol, a reminder of God's patience, the endurance of the righteous, and the inevitability of divine judgment when humanity strays too far from the path of righteousness. Methuselah's life did not end with mere numbers. While he holds the record for the longest living person in the Bible, his true legacy lies in the generations he influenced and the enduring line he preserved. Through his son Lamech and his grandson Noah, Methuselah ensured that the righteous lineage of Adam continued, even as the rest of humanity descended into corruption. Noah, the survivor of the flood, owed his life and his mission in part to Methuselah's presence and longevity. Methuselah lived long enough to see Noah's early life, to guide and witness the continuation of the family line, and to embody the patience and endurance required in a world that was spiraling toward judgment. Methuselah's life also offers profound symbolic meaning. In many ways he represents patience. Nearly 1,000 years of life allowed humanity more time to repent, showing the depth of divine mercy. Observation. He witnessed the rise of civilization, human achievements, and moral decline, giving a long historical perspective on human behavior. A legacy. Through his descendants he bridged the antediluvian world with the post-flood world, ensuring the survival of humanity. The symbolic alignment of Methuselah's death with the beginning of the flood also emphasizes a powerful lesson. Life itself can carry prophetic significance. His long life wasn't just a record to marvel at, it served as a living warning to the world, a countdown toward a moment of divine judgment. Even today, Methuselah's story resonates as a reminder of the interplay between human choices and divine timing. He lived through centuries of opportunity, watching humanity make repeated mistakes, yet enduring as a symbol of hope and continuity. Moreover, Methuselah's story demonstrates the profound importance of generational influence. Just as he inherited spiritual guidance from his father Enoch, he in turn passed the line of righteousness to Lamech and Noah. One life, especially when extended over centuries, can shape countless others, not only through direct action but through the silent example it sets. Finally, Methuselah's life invites us to reflect on patience, moral responsibility, and the ways in which the choices of one generation affect the next. In a world that was increasingly violent and corrupt, Methuselah stood as a bridge, a guardian of a lineage, and a witness to humanity's potential to survive even amidst divine judgment. In this sense, Methuselah's legacy is not measured by his years alone, but by the impact of his life across generations and the preservation of the line that would ultimately ensure the survival of the human race. Methuselah's death marked the end of an extraordinary era. For 969 years, he had been a witness to human history, from the earliest days after Eden to the preparation of the ark for the coming flood. And the moment he died, the waters rose. Genesis gives us a brief but dramatic timeline. Methuselah died the same year the flood began. The world he had lived in, lush, growing yet morally corrupt, was now submerged beneath the waters. Everything he had seen in his long life, the rise of human civilization, the spread of sin, the patience of God, reached a dramatic conclusion. But while Methuselah himself did not survive the flood, his legacy did. His grandson Noah, the son of Lamech, carried forward the line of righteousness, along with his family, preserving life and the potential for a new beginning. Methuselah's long life had prepared this transition. Through his lineage, the human race survived. Through his witness, the story of patience, mercy, and divine timing was embedded into history. Methuselah's story also carries symbolic significance. His name, "When he dies it shall come," was fulfilled exactly as implied. His life became a countdown to judgment, a living representation of divine patience. He saw centuries pass, giving humanity time to change, yet never letting mercy obscure the inevitability of consequence. Even today, Methuselah's life speaks to us across the millennia. It reminds us that patience and mercy often extend longer than we realize. The choices of each generation ripple through history. A life itself can carry a meaning far greater than individual accomplishments. Every era has a countdown of sorts, a moment when actions or inactions meet consequences. Methuselah's 1,000-year life may seem like a fantastical number, almost impossible to imagine. But it serves a purpose beyond literal chronology. It reminds us of the spiritual, moral, and historical weight of time. And through this lens, Methuselah becomes more than a biblical figure. He is a symbol of endurance, witness, and prophecy, whose story bridges the earliest humanity with the post-flood world. As the flood reshaped the earth, the memory of Methuselah's long life, his watchfulness, and his prophetic significance remained embedded in the story of humanity. His life reminds us that even in the face of corruption and judgment, patience, righteousness, and foresight can leave a lasting legacy. Methuselah's story closes the chapter of the antediluvian world, but its lessons continue to resonate. Life is fleeting, choices matter, and sometimes the longest lived among us carry the heaviest responsibility.